Are you ready for day 17? Yes, this is more lies, and more to do with Assange's mental condition, and in particular one Dr. Daly, head of the jail's medical services. And Murray says the British government has been caught twice directly telling important lies about events in Belmarsh prison, each lie proven by documentary evidence. And Dr. Daly is the common factor behind it all. While in the medical wing, or healthcare as it's called, Julian Assange was in effect in solitary confinement, and 3 psychiatrists and a physician with extensive experience of treating trauma have all testified in court that Assange's mental and physical condition deteriorated while he was in healthcare for several months. They also said he improved after he left healthcare. That says something profound about the health care being provided. The same doctors testified that Assange has a poor relationship with Dr. Daly and will not confide his symptoms or feelings to her, and this has also been asserted by defense counsel. Now, Murray writes, let me come to the lies. Unfortunately, to do so, I must reveal details of Julian's medical condition, which I had withheld, but I think the situation is so serious, I must now do that. And he goes back into Kopelman's testimony a few days earlier. And I ain't given more details of that from Kevin Gostola's blog at shadowproof.com, but here's some more details on that from Murray. Kopelman gave evidence that, among other preparations for suicide, Assange had hidden a razor blade in his folded underwear. This had been discovered in a search of his cell. As I did report, Kopelman was subjected to an extremely aggressive cross by James Lewis, who had focused on the notion that Assange's mental illness was simply malingering, and Kopelman had failed to detect this. The razor blade was a key factor in Lewis's browbeating of Kopelman, and he attacked him on it again and again. Lewis stated that Kopelman relied on the razor blade story for his diagnosis. He then proceeded to portray it as a fantasy concocted by Assange to support his malingering. Lewis asked Kopelman repeatedly why, if the story were true, was it not in Dr. Daly's clinical notes? Surely, if a prisoner known to be depressive had a razor blade found in his cell, it would be in the prison medical records. Why had Professor Kopelman failed to note in his report that there was no evidence for the razor blade in Dr. Daly's medical records? Was he hiding that information? Was it not very strange that this incident would not be in the medical notes? Now let me stop here and ask you something. Doesn't it sound to you like Lewis is claiming that there was no razor blade, that it didn't exist? Isn't that exactly what he's saying here? Yeah, sounds like that to me too, but there's going to be something on that a little later. But in an attempt to humiliate Kopelman, Lewis said, "You say you do not rely on the razor blade for your diagnosis, but you do rely on it. Let's then look at your report." He says, oh, look here and here, this paragraph, that paragraph, and so on. Lewis then went on to invite Kopelman to change his diagnosis. He asked him more than once if his diagnosis would be different if there was no razor blade and it were an invention by Assange. Kopelman was plainly unnerved by this attack. He agreed it was very odd indeed it was not mentioned in the medical notes if it were true. The plain attack that he had naively believed an obvious lie disconcerted Kopelman. Except it was Lewis who was not telling the truth. There really was a concealed razor blade, and what Assange had told Kopelman and what Kopelman had believed was true in every single detail. Assange had been charged with the offense of the razor blade. The charge sheet is dated 9 a.m. on 7 May 2019 and reads, on the 5/9/15, blah, blah, blah. We were conducting a routine matrix search solely occupied by Assange. He was asked before we began the search if everything in the cell belonged to him, to which he replied, to my knowledge, yes. During the process of this search, I lifted a pair of his personal underwear up while searching the cupboard. When I lifted them up, I heard a metal object drop inside the cupboard. When I investigated what it was, I saw half of a razor blade which had been concealed in his personal underwear. This had now been placed in evidence bag number blah blah blah. This concludes my report. Murray even has a picture of this that he posts. So yes, it's real, it exists. James Lewis QC panicked. Rather too quickly, Lewis leapt to his feet and asked the judge that it should be noted that he had never said that there was no razor blade. Well, I asked you about that earlier. Didn't it sound like he was saying there was no razor blade? Yep, that's exactly what he was saying. That's the impression everyone got. And from the witness box and under oath, Kopelman stated that was not the impression he had been given either. In repeatedly asserting that, if the razor blade had existed, it would be in the medical notes, Lewis had, at the very least, misled the witness on a material question of fact, that it actually affected his evidence, and Lewis had done so precisely in order to affect the evidence. Panicking, Lewis then gave the game away further by making the desperate assertion that the charge against Mr. Assange had been dismissed by the governor. So the prosecution definitely knew rather more about the events around the razor blade than the defense. Judge Dalek, who was aware that this was a major car crash, grasped at the same straw Lewis was clinging to in desperation and said that if the charge had been dismissed, then there was no proof the razor blade existed. Fitzgerald pointed out what all of you are thinking right now, which is that this is absurd. The charge may have been dismissed for numerous reasons. The existence of the blade was not in doubt. Julian Assange had attested to it, and 2 prison warders had attested to it. Bereitzer said she could only base her views on the decision of the prison governor. But the prison governor never decided there was no razor blade. They just weren't going to go forward with the charges. And Murray writes, for Bereitzer to try to protect both Lewis and the prosecution by pretending the existence of the blade is dependent on the outcome of the subsequent charge, when all 3 people in the cell at the time of the search agreed to its existence, including Assange, is perhaps Bereitzer's most remarkable abuse of legal procedure yet. I should make plain, I do not believe for one moment the government side were not aware all along the razor blade was real. Lewis cross-examined using detailed, prepared notes on the razor blade, and with all the references to it tabulated in Kopelman's report. That this was undertaken by the prosecution without asking the prison if the incident were true defies common sense. So then, fast forward to Thursday, Edward Fitzgerald handed the record of the prison hearing where the charge was discussed to Bereitzer. Bereitzer told Fitzgerald she could not accept the document as it was new evidence. It's rebuttal evidence. You can introduce rebuttal evidence. You have to allow them to introduce rebuttal evidence. Fitzgerald told her she herself asked for the outcome of the charge. He said the document contained very interesting information. Bereitzer said that the governor's decision was in paragraph 19. That was all she had asked for, and she would refuse to take the rest of the document into consideration. Yes, she's full on Judge Dalek now. I will not look at your evidence! I must obey orders! I am a good Dalek! Fitzgerald said the defense may wish to make a formal submission on that. But Murray goes into the question of why wouldn't this be in Daly's medical notes? Even that startling story I did not consider sufficiently powerful to justify publishing the alarming personal details about Julian. But then it happened again. Dr. Nigel Blackwood gave evidence for the prosecution and downplayed all of these diagnoses of mental illness and disputed that he had Asperger's. In the course of this downplaying, he stated that when Julian had been admitted to the healthcare wing on 18 April 2019, it had not been for any medical reason. It had been purely to isolate him from other prisoners because of the video footage of him that had been taken and released by a prisoner. The defense now produced another document from the prison that showed the government was lying. It was a report from prison staff dated 2:30 p.m. on 18 April 2019 and specifically said that Julian was very low and having uncontrollable suicidal urges. It suggested moving him to the medical wing and mentioned a meeting with Dr. Daly. Julian was, in fact, then moved that very same day. Fitzgerald put it to Blackwood that plainly Assange was moved to the medical wing for medical reasons. His evidence was wrong. Blackwood continued to assert that Assange was moved only because of the video. Dr. Daly's medical notes did not say he was moved for medical reasons. The judge pulled up Fitzgerald for saying nonsense, although she had allowed Lewis to be much harder than that on defense witnesses. Fitzgerald asked Blackwood why Assange would be moved to the medical wing because of a video undertaken by another prisoner. Blackwood said the governor had found the video embarrassing and was concerned about reputational damage to the prison. So let us look at this. Dr. Daly did not put in the medical notes that Assange had concealed a razor for suicide in his cell. Dr. Daly did not put in the medical notes that, on the very day Assange was moved to the medical wing, a staff meeting had said he should be moved to the medical wing for uncontrollable suicidal urges. Then, Daly gives Blackwood a cock and bull story on reasons for Assange's removal to the medical wing to assist him in his downplaying of Assange's medical condition. Or, he writes, let us look at the alternative story. The official story is that healthcare, to quote Ross Kemp, where security is on another level, is used for solitary confinement, to hold prisoners in isolation for entirely non-medical reasons. Indeed, to avoid embarrassment, to avoid reputational damage. Assange was kept in isolation in healthcare for months, while, according to 4 doctors, including on this point even Blackwood, his health deteriorated because of the isolation, while under Dr. Daly's care. And that one is the official story. The best they can come up with is, he was not sick, we put him in healthcare for entirely illegitimate reasons as punishment, to avoid embarrassment if prisoners took his photo. I'm going to write to Judge Bereitzer applying for a copy of the transcript of Lewis cross-examining Professor Kopelman on the razor blade with a view to reporting Lewis to the Bar Council. I do wonder whether the General Medical Council might not have reason to consider the practice of Dr. Daly in this case. And then the final witness is Dr. Sandra Crosby, and he says, while her evidence was very compelling, again, I see no strong reason to reveal it. And I'm not going to go into it either. Kevin Gostola doesn't seem to have much to say about it, so. Murray concludes, there were 2 witness statements read very quickly into the record. This was actually very important, but passed almost unnoticed. John Young of Cryptome.org gave evidence that Cryptome had published the unredacted cables on 1 September 2011, crucially the day before WikiLeaks published them. Cryptome is US-based, but they had never been approached by law enforcement about these unredacted cables in any way, nor asked to take them down. The cables remained online on Cryptome. Similarly, Chris Butler, manager for Internet Archive, gave evidence of the unredacted cables and other classified documents being available on the Wayback Machine. They had never been asked to take down, nor been threatened with prosecution. Yeah, I guess the main thing about this is, for better or for worse, this isn't going to go on much longer. Judge Dalek is demanding that they wrap everything up, not giving them time for closing arguments. And we'll see how it goes. It seems like everything is in the bag for the prosecution, and whatever misgivings Bereitzer might have had earlier, apparently someone has had the talk with her and given her marching orders again, because she's fully back as an unthinking pawn of the prosecution. But you never can tell. They almost got through to her once. Maybe they can get through to her again. Maybe we'll be surprised. I certainly hope so. But we'll see what happens. Thank you so much for listening. As usual, please share this everywhere. Please tell everyone you can about it. Please share Murray's blog post. Please share this video or audio file or however you got it. And tell everyone you can about it. And above all, please go to donate.pagosity.tv and give me a little something if you can, because these last few I think really are in danger more than the rest of being demonetized. And even just a little bit helps, even if it's just a few pennies in cryptocurrency. It all helps. So thank you so very much. Until next time, stay strong and be free.